Welcome back, everyone. Our next speakers come to us from the University of the Pacific. We have Veronica Wells, Head of Library Research and Learning Services, Michele Gibney, Head of Publishing and Scholarship Support, and Mickel Paris, Health Sciences Librarian and Assistant Professor of Practice. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Getting my slides here. Thank you all for joining us. So our presentation is called Critical Pedagogy in Library Collections, Conducting a DEI Library Audit with Student Interns. So we're talking about how we used a critical pedagogical approach to involve students in our diversity, equity, and inclusion audit in the spring 2021 semester. So first, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. University of the Pacific has 3 campuses in California. And so our land acknowledgement includes all 3 areas. Long before the land was colonized by Spanish, Mexican, and Americans, and California's political boundaries were set, the area was rich with diverse cultures. According to UC Berkeley's California Language Archive, there were as many as 20 different language families spoken in what was to become California. Currently, Pacific's campuses are on the unceded ancestral homeland of what was and still is Yokuts, Miwok, and the Miwok peoples from Stockton, the Nisenan peoples of Sacramento, and the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples of San Francisco. Here's the outline of our presentation, which will begin with an overview of the project, followed by the methodology, and then we will highlight some of the results of the audit and end with a discussion about what our students learned. And I just want to note we had a student presenter lined up to join us, but unfortunately, Corey couldn't make it at the last moment, but hopefully we can capture some of his impressions of the project throughout the presentation. So first, we'll discuss the overview of the audit. So after the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement last year, as the result of the murder of George Floyd, University of the Pacific's President Callahan sent a memo asking all units to engage in social justice work. The library chose to do an audit of the library collection. A diversity, equity, and inclusion audit allows us to examine the voices and subjects that are represented and to reveal specific gaps to address. We all had our reservations at first because the project seemed gigantic in scope. Plus, we knew what we were already going to find: mostly white, heteronormative men. Therefore, it was important to have a larger outcome than to simply discover what we already knew was there. And that was to generate discussions with our students and the campus-wide community with the hopes of uncovering practical solutions to address inequities, as well as to seek more funding from administration to purchase DEI-related library materials. We used a critical pedagogical approach by encouraging students to use critical information literacy skills and engaging them in conversations that explored and critiqued power structures in academia, librarianship, and publishing. Critical information literacy in this instance coincides with Iman Tool's article called "A Decade of Critical Information Literacy, a Review of the Literature." Tool states critical information literacy considers in what ways librarians may encourage students to engage with and act upon the power structures underpinning information's production and dissemination. By using critical pedagogy and assessing student understanding, evaluation, and problem-solving skills throughout the process, this study provides an additional layer to DEI collection audits and encourages more diverse, equitable, and inclusive collection development. Next, I'm going to discuss our methodology, and I want to address the quote in this slide by James Baldwin, which says, "The paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated." And this is what we gave the students the opportunity to do: examine the context within which they were being educated. When developing the student internship position description, we identified these 3 learning outcomes. Students will learn how library resources are acquired and cataloged. Students will learn about DEI issues in libraries, the context of specific disciplines, and the publishing world. And students will develop critical thinking and information literacy skills by assessing materials in the library collection. Our students evaluated samples of the following subject areas. We sampled either 1,000 or 10% of those areas, whichever was less. And then we we had students evaluate these titles based on several criteria, which you can see listed here, including the author's gender, ethnicity, LGBTQ+ identity, and disability status. I also want to note that students participated in the development of this criteria and the overall process. We also met regularly over Zoom because we were all learning, teaching, and working remotely, which of course posed several challenges to the project. And we met about twice a month to check in on the audit and to discuss articles related to DEI issues in publishing and libraries. And we also had a Slack site where we chatted back and forth regarding brief questions and problems. And here's a list of the articles that we covered throughout the semester. And what was kind of an unexpected outcome of this is that we created a learning community together where we were discovering these issues that maybe we kind of knew were there, but we had never really fully understood the depth of. And then we assessed student learning through 3 questionnaires that we administered at the beginning, middle, and end of the project. The questionnaires included 9 questions, 6 of which were open-ended and 3 were Likert questions. You can see a couple examples there. And the responses were anonymously collected, and we also sought and were awarded IRB approval for the study. And next, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Michele.
Thanks, Veronica. So I'm going to talk briefly about the audit data that we collected. I love this quote as it speaks to what we were doing with the collection, the DEI audit of our collection. In order to rectify the diversity gaps in our collection, we have to first understand what they are, plus having the data to back up our collection decisions moving forwards will be invaluable. Next slide, please. So jumping into the data itself, as you can see in this chart, and as Veronica mentioned earlier, as we knew we would find going in, there are predominantly more white males in the collection. Of the titles where gender was identified, 84.7% are by men, 15.1% by women. And of the titles where ethnicity was identifiable, 74% of the titles were by white first authors or editors. This is a very small amount of the data that we collected in the actual audit of the collection, but in the interest of time, we're not going to share more of it here, but we have presented on it on our campus, and that was recorded. So if you're interested, I can put a link in the chat. And then we're currently working on a journal article for publication as well, so we will have that in the future. But for now, I will turn it over to Mickel to talk more about student perspectives.
Thank you, Michele. I'm looking forward to our discussion on the qualitative student survey responses, which sheds new light on the effect of critical pedagogy on our teaching. We hypothesized that we would see a progression in the student answers over the 3 surveys from generalizations to specifics. And based on the aims in critical pedagogy, the students would learn more about DEI over the course of the project as librarians encourage student engagement with DEI issues in the biweekly meetings, as well as student evaluation of the power structures inherent in the library's curation of the published materials in the collection. Students were co-investigators, and they looked at who has control and power over the production of books, resources, and knowledge in libraries and publishing. And next slide. The big question, how would you describe diversity, equity, and inclusion, was asked in all 3 surveys. We took the responses and coded them down to the base words and phrases, giving us these 8 main themes. Now, the numbers shown are percentages over the course of the 3 questionnaires. As you might see from the coded data, it does not appear that most of the themes change significantly over time, including the top themes of representation in DEI, pursue inclusion and challenging bias and fairness. However, we did notice tonal shifts in the individual coded responses within the themes, as shown on the next slide. So in this slide, which is a radar plot visualization, the student responses showed a tonal shift in language from the first questionnaire to the 3rd. My apologies for the small text. I enlarged the coding areas with the higher student responses for examples. The students went from basic definitions of DEI, such as different backgrounds, opportunities, and voices in the blue, to more focused language with action verbs, such as promotes differences, including others, reflects population, providing resources, those in the red. By the third questionnaire in the red, we see statements such as DEI means to actively and systemically support marginalized groups. This switch to active verbs infers agency, where the students begin to negotiate the empowerment behind the idea of DEI, rather than just deposit definitions of DEI into their memory. And so in our analysis, this supports the intent of critical pedagogy. Next slide. So students also shared their expectations on how diverse, equitable, and inclusive the library collections were in the questionnaires. From a critical pedagogy teaching perspective, this question was designed to prime student thinking to focus on a critical reasoned approach to the DEI work, rather than just acquiring basic information literacy skills, although they did learn those skills in the process. Once again, we were hoping to see a transformation of student thinking about the library collection, and the results, the numbers here are the total percentages from the 3 questionnaires. As you can see, the majority of the responses were that they had low expectations to start. Those low expectations were met, or they became even worse than expected over the course. And the better than expected responses stand out, even though it was only 2 student responses. So one limitation in this question is that there may have not been enough context for answers that started off with a very low expectation. Students also suggested that DEI may be dependent on the discipline itself. Next slide. Critical pedagogy encourages students and instructors to reflect on their practice. The questionnaires invited students to reflect on how their expectations changed throughout the course of the project. Not only did students address how to make the library collection more diverse, equitable, and inclusive, which are those red quotes, but students also provided self-reflection by including themselves as part of the process and how they would inform others in the campus community about DEI issues moving forward, those yellow quote boxes. Immediately after the audit, the library received a $10,000 grant from the University DEI committee to purchase books, and students participated in the selection process, which was a nice addition to the DEI project. It's uplifting to see how the DEI audit encouraged students to develop self-awareness about DEI issues and how books are published, curated, and marketed, and how students can affect that process, and also how they can translate the importance of DEI from the library to other areas of the university. Next slide. Our student Corey couldn't make the presentation, so we added a few quotes which reflected his ideas on the project. He conveyed that the project teaches us or teaches the students how to analyze sources, and it requires creativity and critical thinking that's built through those conversations in those meetings, which were conducted journal club style. He said the work was very tedious, which it can be for audits, especially not being able to access the library collection due to the pandemic, but students viewed the work as very important to obtain data for future DEI initiatives. Overall, it was inspiring to watch students think critically about the library collection and how their engagement with the project led to very important realizations. Using this critical pedagogy framework, we shifted the focus of critical thinking and information literacy instruction to a student-centered learning modality instead of the student as the passive receiver of information. And next slide. Our final thought on critical pedagogy is that it can position education as a catalyst for social change. This university library project supports educating students through critical engagement with diversity and equity issues in our society. We hope our work can stir up new ideas in student learning that can bring justice to library collections in the future. Thank you all so very much for attending, and we would be happy to now answer any questions in the remaining time that we have.
Thank you so much. I loved the radial graph. That was awesome. So we do have some questions. The first question is, the person asking the question is saying, maybe I missed this, but I'm curious what level these students were, how you recruited them, and whether and how they were compensated.
I can go ahead and answer that. So our students were through, I think we recruited from sophomore to senior level students. I don't think we had any first year students. And what was wonderful is we were able to hire, I'm not sure if we mentioned this, but we hired 8 students and they were from across different areas of campus. The ways that we advertised it included sending it out on social media. I sent it out to my faculty lists. I know other librarians sent it out to their faculty. So it was really like kind of grassroots, just like word of mouth. Hopefully people would find it. And then was also posted on to our university campus's student job site called Handshake. And so I know some students found it there. And we were a little bit unsure at first if we would get a lot of attention, but then we got way more applicants than we were able to hire, which was very encouraging because many of the students applied because it involved DEI, not necessarily because they simply wanted a job. And then we paid students hourly. We were able to pay them just a little bit more than minimum wage to just acknowledge the labor involved in this work and that this work is really important. And I think, were there any other aspects to that question?
I think you covered it really well. Thank you.
Yes. And I think it was important that we paid them. You know, we had thought about offering course credit as an option, but I think paying students is better.
Great, thank you. So next question is, do you have anything to add to what you learned about student impressions of the library in general? And were there any surprises that came out of the feedback from the students?
Michelle, Michael, do you want to start with that? All right, I can start.
You go ahead.
Well, so our group of student interns were already mostly interested in DEI. So that was helpful because they already sort of had this social justice aim that they were excited to participate in. But in our surveys, they did acknowledge that they hadn't really thought of it before. They hadn't really thought of diversity, equity, inclusion issues in the library collection. They thought that the library was fine. Sure, there are probably some issues, but they didn't think that it was that bad. And then after the audit, they were like, oh yeah, it's bad. And not that it's like our fault that it's bad, but it's just like, it's the system that we are engaged in that's problematic and that needs to change. And so that was really exciting to see how they changed their perspectives throughout the course of the project.
Great, thanks. Anything else, Michelle or Michael?
Yeah, I have something to add. I was most impressed with the students who responded with the translational aspect of this project, which was nothing that I was going to predict would happen, which is taking that information they learned here out into the broader university committee. When we did our spring talk, which was in the middle, the mid-audit had just been conducted, the mid-questionnaire. One of the students mentioned this, and faculty members were just lighting up the chat room in Zoom with how they love this. And so I think there was a kind of a connection that the students made with translating what they learned into the broader university committee, and then the faculty being drawn to that as a way to engage and to have conversations to further these ideas. So in a way, it's a gift that keeps on giving. So I really think that's what, for me, really said that this was a lot different than just teaching how to look up, things in a database or information literacy skills, which they did learn through the process.
Great. We're supposed to be wrapping up, but I'll just sort of stick in one more very quick question, which is, what were the reactions of the selectors to this project?
So we will be sharing with the wider library faculty very soon, but overall, everyone is very excited about the project and the opportunities that this, I think, affords us to bring more attention and awareness to the collection and to proactively find ways to diversify it. We now have dedicated funds that our university librarian was able to procure from endowments, so that we can purchase DEI specific materials. And so that's, I think, really exciting. And we have some ideas and plans for how we want to spend that money, but we're all still kind of figuring that out as we go.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to each of our presenters. There's such incredible content for us to take away today. We're going to transition now to the closing keynote. If you have to take off, thank you so much for having been with us today. Please consider filling out our conference feedback form, and we'll see you in just a few for our closing keynote.